In the spring of 1873, beneath chandeliers trembling with candlelight and expectation, a single sentence would alter the course of two guarded hearts. The ballroom of Hawthorne Hall shimmered in a haze of perfume and polished marble, where silk skirts whispered across the floor like conspirators and laughter rose bright as shattered glass. It was an evening devoted to display, of jewels, of alliances, of daughters poised upon the fragile brink of advantageous futures. Yet amid the glittering excess stood one figure whose presence unsettled the symmetry of privilege. Miss Eliza Whitcombe did not glitter. She endured. Her gown, though ivory and carefully pressed, bore the delicate evidence of patient alteration. Lace from a bygone wedding had been restitched along the sleeves, and the bodice held the faint sheen of fabric preserved beyond its season. She wore no necklace, only her mother's modest pearl comb securing dark coils at the nape of her neck. The effect was not impoverished, but restrained, as though she had chosen dignity over adornment and would not apologize for the decision. Whispers trailed her movements nonetheless, curling like smoke. There stands the penniless beauty. Such carriage for a ruined house. Eliza heard every murmur. She permitted none to land. Across the room, Marquis Alistair Ravenshire stood encircled by admirers and opportunists, his tall frame framed by crimson drapery and candlelight. His tailoring was impeccable, his cravat tied with studied carelessness, his dark hair brushed back from a brow more thoughtful than his reputation allowed. Society adored him for his fortune and feared him for his candor. He was a rider of wild horses and sharper wagers, a man who laughed easily and committed rarely. He possessed that dangerous quality of youth married to power, the belief that consequences would always bend. His gaze found Eliza not by accident but by instinct. Something in her stillness resisted the room's choreography. She did not flutter. She did not solicit attention. She stood like a column weathered by storm yet unbroken, and it unsettled him more than any painted flirtation. A gentleman beside him followed his line of sight and smirked. A pity Ravenshire. Beauty so striking, yet so inconveniently accompanied by debt. Another chimed in, her father's estate dwindles faster than the punch bowl. The laughter that followed was light, practiced, unkind. Alistair should have deflected it. Instead, stung by their expectation and eager to reclaim the ease of command, he allowed arrogance to speak where conscience hesitated. Well, he drawled, lifting a glass he did not taste, if Miss Whitcombe seeks restoration, perhaps she should attempt something more athletic than admiration. Curiosity sharpened the circle. Such as? He smiled, too broadly, too publicly. Tomorrow's spring race. Let her win it, and I shall make her my bride. The words carried farther than he intended, propelled by candlelit air and the merciless appetite of gossip. Conversation faltered. Fans paused mid-flutter. The orchestra stumbled before recovering its rhythm. Eliza turned. Their eyes met across the crowded floor, and in that suspended instant the ballroom seemed to contract, drawing all breath toward the fragile space between them. She had heard him. Of course she had heard him. Her composure did not shatter, it refined itself. She began to walk toward him, each step measured, her posture unassailable. Those nearest parted instinctively, compelled by a drama more intoxicating than music. She stopped before him, her chin lifted just enough to deny submission. "My lord," she said, her voice low but unshaking, "is it your habit to gamble with lives as readily as with horses?" A flush crept beneath his collar, faint but visible. "It was merely sport, Miss Whitcombe." "Sport," she repeated, tasting the word as though it might poison. "Then I shall endeavor tomorrow to ride as though my dignity depends upon it." A murmur rippled outward, admiration mingling with anticipation. She had not wept. She had not fled. She had accepted. Something within Alistair shifted, subtle yet undeniable. He had expected embarrassment, perhaps anger. He had not anticipated courage delivered with such surgical grace. For the first time that evening, his amusement thinned. "You would accept the challenge?" he asked, quieter now. "I accept no man's mockery," she replied. "But I do accept opportunity." The orchestra swelled again, desperate to reclaim normalcy, yet the room had altered. Eliza inclined her head with impeccable politeness and turned away, leaving behind a silence heavier than reproach. Alistair watched her retreat through clusters of silk and speculation. The jest that had tasted harmless upon his tongue now lingered like ash. He had meant to entertain. Instead he had exposed something raw, hers certainly but perhaps his own as well. Around him, wagers were already forming, names being scribbled upon calling cards, expectations sharpening into spectacle. "Bold creature," one gentleman muttered approvingly, Desperate creature, another corrected. Alistair did not join either verdict. He found himself imagining her astride a horse at dawn, skirts gathered, eyes fixed forward, riding not toward matrimony but toward vindication. The image unsettled him more than ridicule ever could. Across the hall, Eliza paused beside a tall window where moonlight filtered through glass and softened her reflection. For a fleeting moment her composure faltered. Humiliation pressed cold against her ribs. Yet beneath it burned a fiercer ember, the refusal to be reduced to anecdote. If society required spectacle, she would offer it on her own terms. When she glanced back across the room, she discovered the Marquis still watching. And in his expression, no longer laughter, but something perilously close to doubt. Dawn broke across the rolling fields of Hawthorne Park with a muted brilliance, mist curling like whispers over the dewy grass, and the air carried a hint of horse sweat and fresh earth. Society had gathered in clusters along the hedged racecourse, parasols raised against the hesitant sun, voices humming with expectation. Carriages, glistening in polished paint and brass, lined the distant edges of the track, their occupants leaning forward to glimpse both sport and scandal. Eliza Whitcombe approached on her father's old mare, Bramble, whose flanks shone damply, muscles tense with years of quiet labor. The mare was far from the glossy stallions that dominated these grounds, yet she bore her rider with the dignity of loyalty rather than display. Every whispered comparison, so fragile a mount for so delicate a girl, was carried on the wind, yet Eliza neither flinched nor faltered. Her hands, wrapped in simple gloves, held the reins with precision and authority. Each beat of Bramble's hooves on the wet earth seemed to echo her resolve. Marquis Alistair Ravenshire had arrived not to watch idly, but to participate, astride his own chestnut stallion, the creature rippling with sleek power beneath him. Observers had expected him to treat the day as a frivolous exhibition, yet his eyes, dark and discerning, were fixed upon Eliza with a curiosity that bordered on the dangerous. He did not laugh, he did not smirk. There was a gravity in the set of his jaw and the tension in his shoulders, as though the stakes of the morning had already become clear. The wager he had uttered the previous evening, careless in intent, now hung between them like a taut cord, unyielding and luminous with possibility. Every spectator, from the Grand Duchess in violet silk to the young gentleman with a notebook of wagers, leaned into the anticipation, sensing that this contest would carry consequences far beyond the finish line. Moments before the signal to begin, Alistair approached her. He dismounted with effortless grace, the polished boots tapping against the damp grass. In his hand he held a pair of riding gloves, black leather stitched with care, supple enough to protect yet elegant enough to display. "A rider ought not begin unprotected," he said, voice low, carrying a timbre that mingled authority with unexpected consideration. The words startled her, not the gesture itself, which was hardly ostentatious, but the thoughtfulness that had been sewn into it. She glanced at him, lips pressed in measured defiance. "I thank you, my lord, but my hands require no intercession from a spectator," she replied, her tone calm, yet carrying the faint edge of challenge. He inclined his head, a subtle acknowledgment, yet the corners of his mouth lifted ever so slightly, hinting at amusement restrained. "Then I shall trust that your skill is sufficient to protect them," he said, stepping back, leaving the gloves at her side. The trumpet call signaled the beginning. Hooves struck the earth in a rhythm that resonated across the hedges, dust rising like breath from the soil. Eliza urged Bramble forward with subtle pressure of heel and shift of weight, her frame poised, eyes fixed straight ahead. The stallions around her thundered like wild storms, their riders crouched low, muscles taut, yet Bramble carried her with a steady elegance that belied her years. Each stride became a dialogue, she guiding, she listening, she commanding. The crowd gasped as she navigated the first turn, holding the lead not by recklessness but by calculated grace. Alistair had not expected such precision. Admiration flickered in the depths of his gaze, though he did not allow it to soften his expression entirely. Midway through the course, the chestnut horse beneath Alistair stumbled over an unseen rut. Gasps erupted from the sidelines, whispers of scandal sharpening into audible commentary. The Marquis regained control with a skill born of countless rides, yet the fleeting falter had been witnessed. Eliza, passing the spot where he had nearly lost his balance, did not accelerate in triumph. She eased Bramble forward with deliberate gentleness, a subtle acknowledgment that she would not win upon the misfortune of another. Honor, more than victory, guided her hand. Alistair, recovering, realized with a pang that she possessed not only courage but a moral measure he had seldom encountered. They crossed the finish line almost simultaneously. The horn sounded, but the race had transcended its formalities. Confusion and excitement mingled among the spectators. Some clapped, some murmured doubts about the outcome. The judges conferred, yet their decision seemed trivial compared to the tension suspended between the two riders. Alistair dismounted slowly, brushing the damp hair from his brow, his eyes finding Eliza's across the final stretch. Neither spoke at first. Words would have felt inadequate to the intensity of the moment. By the next morning, the press had transformed the event into scandal. Headlines twisted truth into insinuation: desperate girl traps nobleman, marquis enamored with fallen fortune, and other variations that gnawed at propriety. Gossip coursed through London's drawing rooms as swiftly as blood through veins. Yet despite the scrutiny, Alistair made his way toward the Whitcombe estate, alone. His arrival carried no grand announcement, no fanfare of triumph or ridicule. He came as a man compelled, not by society, but by curiosity and the subtle disturbance of expectation. The Whitcombe manor, a weathered testament to past grandeur, seemed smaller in morning light than rumor had imagined. Ivy clung to stone walls in patient swirls, and windows reflected the soft blush of dawn. Inside, Eliza moved with quiet efficiency, arranging the hearth, attending to minor tasks, yet never fully relinquishing the tension in her posture. When she finally saw him in the doorway, she did not smile, nor did she feign surprise. She simply regarded him with steady, unreadable eyes, as though measuring his worth in silence. The contrast between her composed dignity and the world's expectation of flustered embarrassment struck him sharply. The image of her astride bramble, firm and unyielding in her command, lingered in his mind, mingling with a recognition that he had underestimated both the stakes and the woman before him. Alistair removed his gloves with deliberate care, placing them upon the table between them. His fingers lingered briefly over the supple leather before he spoke. "I did not come to gloat," he said, his voice lower than in the ballroom, almost confessional. "Nor to offer consolation." He paused, searching her eyes for reaction. "I came to see you not as a jest but as you truly are." Eliza's lips parted slightly, a subtle gesture, and her hands, still folded in front of her, betrayed a faint tremor of acknowledgement. The day had begun with the fragile certainty of sport, yet it had revealed itself as something far more complicated. Within the quiet walls of the estate, amidst the scent of polished wood and early flowers, the first threads of mutual understanding began to weave themselves, intricate and dangerous. Outside, the morning mist thickened again, curling along the gravel paths, blurring the line between observation and intrusion, between jest and sincerity. Neither spoke further for a long moment, and yet neither needed to. In the hush of that shared space, it was clear. What had begun as a wager, a spectacle for others, was already becoming a matter of consequence far beyond any race or headline. The tension between them hung as palpable as the morning fog, and both sensed, with unspoken certainty, that neither could retreat entirely. The soft rapping of rain against the leaded windows began, yet it did not break the silence. It was as if the world, uncertain and breathless, waited to see who would make the first move, and whether pride or desire would dictate the next step. The Whitcombe manor, weathered by years of neglect and the soft erosion of memory, seemed quieter than Eliza had ever known it, though the faint creak of floorboards underfoot reminded her that time, like misfortune, leaves its marks in subtle insistence. Sunlight pierced the tall windows in long, slender shafts, illuminating motes of dust that hung like suspended secrets in the air. The portraits of her ancestors, faces stern with expectation, lined the walls. Their eyes seemed to measure her, not for the victories of the day but for the courage with which she bore her diminished station. It was here, in this stillness, that Alistair Ravenshire found himself both intruding and invited, stepping across the threshold with a tentative deliberation that betrayed unfamiliar uncertainty. He removed his gloves with careful precision, placing them upon the worn mahogany table, their black leather gleaming softly in the morning light. The gesture was simple, yet it spoke of intent, of attention, of recognition. "I did not come to gloat," he said, his voice low, tempered by the distance of propriety and the weight of something unspoken. "Nor to offer consolation. I came because I must understand what I glimpsed yesterday. Not the spectacle, but you." Eliza, standing near the hearth with her hands folded, allowed her gaze to drift briefly to the fire before returning to his. Her posture remained impeccable, yet the faint tremor in her fingers betrayed the impact of the previous day's ordeal. "My lord," she said, her tone carefully neutral, "intention does not soften humiliation. A jest, however lightly offered, is still a wound to dignity." Alistair's lips pressed into a line, the corner of his mouth twitching as though resisting the pull of humility. He took a measured step forward. "And yet, Miss Whitcombe, I did not laugh at you. Not truly. My amusement was of the moment, careless, yes, but the truth is this, I have seldom encountered courage so absolute, and I confess it unsettled me." His words, deliberate and heavy with admission, hung between them like smoke curling toward the ceiling. She did not respond immediately, studying the man before her with measured attention, her dark eyes unreadable yet penetrating. He moved closer, cautiously bridging the space that propriety demanded yet curiosity tempted him to traverse. In his hand, a folded document emerged, a deed, formal and weighty, its presence announcing an unexpected gesture. "These debts," he said softly, "they are not yours to bear alone. Allow me the courtesy of relief." The paper seemed to tremble in his grasp as though acknowledging the gravity of what it represented. Eliza's brow rose, a flicker of indignation crossing her otherwise controlled visage. "I will not be rescued like a stray," she said, voice firm, resolute. "I will not permit charity to define me." Alistair's expression softened, and in a deliberate motion he tore the deed in half, letting the fragments drift to the floor. Dust motes caught in the sunlight as the paper fluttered, silent witnesses to a gesture that was neither boast nor apology, but something more fragile, more honest. "Then allow me to stand beside you," he said, voice lowered to a private timbre, "not above you, not in pity, but as one who sees truth where others only see rumor." His eyes, dark with uncharacteristic gravity, searched hers for acknowledgment, for recognition of the rare equality he offered. The room seemed to contract, the still air charged with the tension of shared understanding. Eliza's hands, still folded before her, relaxed imperceptibly. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment the faintest shadow of vulnerability passed across her face. "Courage," she murmured almost to herself, "is not measured by wealth or station, but by the refusal to bow beneath expectation." The words, though softly spoken, struck Alistair with profound resonance, echoing the very principle that had compelled him to step beyond his habitual arrogance. He drew a quiet breath, the kind that carries both confession and restraint. "And yet," he said, a hint of the playful edge returning to his tone, "you rode with more grace than I could command, and I cannot claim to have anticipated the impact of such poise. There is a lesson in that, I believe." He did not smile, yet the tension in his shoulders eased as if permission had been granted for a rare intimacy between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of mutual recognition. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing against the windows and carrying with it the scent of early blossoms and rain yet to fall. The manor seemed suspended in that moment, neither past nor future intruding upon the fragile present. Alistair took another step closer, lowering his voice further. "When you ride, Miss Whitcombe, you do not flee. You advance. I have seldom witnessed courage that does not waver, yet you ride forward, and in that you are unparalleled." His words, intimate yet measured, lingered in the air, a delicate bridge between admiration and confession. Eliza's gaze softened ever so slightly, though her composure remained largely intact. She sensed the weight behind the words, the acknowledgement not just of skill but of character, of integrity, of an unspoken resonance that stirred far deeper than society's scrutiny. And in the quiet space that now stretched between them, unbroken by the demands of propriety or expectation, something began to shift. The humiliation of the wager, the laughter of the ballroom, the whispered commentary, all of it faded into insignificance against the gravity of this rare, unguarded connection. Alistair moved to leave, his presence lingering in the room like a shadow reluctant to fade. "I am summoned to London," he said almost reluctantly, "by matters that cannot be postponed. But know this, Miss Whitcombe, my thoughts will not be elsewhere, nor my concern diminished by distance." There was no flourish, no declaration of intent, merely the quiet, steady weight of a promise implied and understood. Eliza nodded once, imperceptibly, returning her attention to the window and the soft light that now fell upon her reflection. The faintest curve of anticipation, mingled with apprehension, touched her lips. She did not speak, for words were not yet sufficient to contain the complexity of what had transpired. Yet her heart, beneath the measured rhythm of restraint, beat with a heightened awareness that the balance of power and sentiment had irrevocably shifted. In the hush of the manor, amid the scent of polished wood, warm hearth, and the lingering perfume of early spring, both realized that the race, though concluded, had only revealed the beginning of a far deeper contest. One of understanding, of courage, and of hearts poised on the precipice of discovery. As the door closed behind him, the quiet left behind was not emptiness but charged expectation. Outside, clouds gathered over distant hills, promising rain yet holding it back, and in the silence of that waiting, both sensed that what had begun as sport, as wager, as spectacle, had already become a matter far more intimate and consequential than either dared acknowledge. The storm of society would return, but within these walls, in these brief, suspended hours, something fragile, profound, and dangerous had been set into motion, a bond neither could yet name but neither could escape. The city of London awoke in muted grey, fog curling along the streets like smoke from unseen hearths, and the clatter of carriage wheels against cobblestones provided a steady rhythm for the pulse of anticipation. Alistair Ravenshire walked through the streets with measured strides, his gloves tucked neatly under his arm, his gaze fixed on the distance yet haunted by thoughts that tugged at the corners of his mind. The grandeur of townhouses, their wrought iron balconies and polished stone, seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of expectation pressing upon him. The engagement negotiations arranged by his mother, Lady Ravenshire, awaited him. She had anticipated his acquiescence, his compliance, as though the heart were a ledger to be balanced against fortune. Yet he could not comply, not truly, while the image of Eliza Whitcombe, resolute and unyielding, occupied every shadowed corner of his thoughts. Lady Ravenshire received him in a drawing-room adorned with velvet and gilding, her eyes sharp as she surveyed her son. "Alistair," she said, voice carrying the authority of generations, "you will not tether yourself to ruin. Lady Genevieve is suitable, wealthy, advantageous. This infatuation is imprudent." Her hands rested upon the back of a high-backed chair, fingers pressing lightly as though emphasizing the weight of propriety. "I have never equated fortune with virtue," he replied, voice low but firm, the calm edge of conviction underlying each syllable. "Ruin, madam, has more integrity than wealth if the heart it shelters is honest. I will not compromise what I recognize as truth." His words hung, deliberate and unsettling. Lady Ravenshire's lips pursed. She had expected concession, perhaps negotiation, but not this defiance carved from sincerity. The day passed in a haze of salon whispers and discreet observation, but in the quiet moments, his mind returned invariably to the countryside, the gentle incline of the racecourse, the soft rustle of Bramble's coat, the steely calm in Eliza's eyes. He could see her still, poised against the horizon, the image sharper than any memory. And then, almost imperceptibly, he began to understand the gravity of what he had stirred. The wager, the race, the scandal, all had drawn them together not in triumph or defeat, but in an unspoken recognition of courage and character. Meanwhile, Eliza moved through her days with the same meticulous composure she had always maintained, though the weight of society's scrutiny pressed upon her more insistently. Invitations rescinded, whispers in drawing-rooms, and the subtle turning of eyes wherever she passed reminded her that the race had not concluded in innocence, but had become fodder for speculation. Yet she bore it with quiet defiance. She did not seek to alter perception, nor to solicit pity. She sought only to maintain the integrity that had carried her through the humiliation and the race. And when a messenger delivered a single white camellia, its petals pristine and scent delicate, she paused, lifting it to the light. A note, folded and trimmed in careful script, accompanied it: "Courage should never ride alone." The gesture was at once simple and profound, both a declaration and a challenge. Eliza turned the flower in her hand, considering its meaning, sensing the presence of the giver across the miles. Society could misinterpret it, distort it, ridicule it, but she understood. The camellia was more than a symbol of admiration. It was an acknowledgement of equality, of recognition, and of the beginning of something neither could yet name aloud. The confrontation at the London exhibition came swiftly, almost inevitably. The hall was vast, its high ceilings and ornate chandeliers reflecting the day's soft light. Patrons and socialites filled the space, their murmurs vibrating like taut strings. Lady Genevieve Harcourt, radiant in silks of deepest sapphire, stood expectant, her posture perfect, her smile poised for triumph. Alistair approached her with measured calm, and in that moment, the room seemed to contract, centering upon him, upon the unspoken truth he carried. "I cannot and I will not," he said, voice carrying across the hall with clarity that silenced the murmurs. The assembled crowd drew in a collective breath. "If I am to be defeated, let it be by the only woman who has ever outrun my arrogance." His eyes scanned the room until they rested upon Eliza, standing with composure unbroken, yet with the faintest tension in her stance betraying the anticipation she had managed to conceal. A hush fell over the exhibition. Gasps and whispers rippled outward, but Alistair did not falter. He moved toward her with deliberate care, not kneeling, not imploring, but standing as an equal, the distance between them charged with tension and unspoken possibility. Eliza's heart, restrained for so long under the weight of propriety and societal expectation, began to recognize the courage mirrored in his own. Their eyes met, and in that gaze was an acknowledgment of the trials endured, the respect earned, and the nascent connection forged by shared understanding. The whispered commentary of society became background noise, inconsequential in the face of the revelation that had crystallized between them. She realized that the wager, the race, the scandal, these had been instruments not of triumph or defeat but of insight. Alistair had revealed a side of himself that few had witnessed, unguarded, honest, capable of admiration and humility alike. And she, in turn, recognized the rare quality in him that went beyond wealth, beyond reputation, beyond the expectations of family or society. A man who could see courage as it truly was, unfiltered and unadorned. A moment of hesitation lingered, delicate and potent. Neither moved, yet both felt the shift of gravity between them, the almost imperceptible tilt toward possibility. The room, filled with opulence and observation, had been reduced to the quiet expanse of understanding and acknowledgement. The camellia's message, simple yet profound, echoed silently. Courage should never ride alone, but it must be chosen freely. Alistair's gaze softened, no longer sharp with challenge, but tempered with recognition and the tentative warmth of something more than admiration. "Miss Whitcombe," he said, voice low, carrying the weight of sincerity, "I have crossed the threshold from which there is no return. I cannot, nor would I wish to, recede into indifference. Whatever society decrees, whatever expectations are pressed upon us, I choose to acknowledge that which is true." Eliza's lips curved subtly, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. The quiet strength she had wielded throughout humiliation and scrutiny now aligned with the recognition of the man who had finally met her as an equal. Yet she did not speak immediately. Words would need to follow, carefully measured, tempered by prudence and by the deepening awareness that society's gaze would remain unrelenting. The soft creak of the exhibition doors, the shuffle of patrons, the distant echo of carriages along cobblestones, all became the backdrop to a moment suspended in time, charged with anticipation. The tension, so finely tuned through weeks of misunderstanding, courage and revelation, had reached a point of impossible equilibrium. Both understood that the next step, spoken or unspoken, would define the course of their lives, far beyond the gaze of society or the reach of rumor. As Alistair extended a hand, not in command but in invitation, Eliza met it with measured confidence. Their fingers brushed, a spark of understanding and trust passing between them. The world, with all its scrutiny and expectation, seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet acknowledgement of mutual recognition. And in that charged silence, the promise of possibility unfolded, delicate yet irresistible, waiting to be claimed. The camellia's petals, fragile and white, had whispered the truth. Courage had not ridden alone, but the journey had only just begun. The morning broke in pale silver over the rolling fields beyond Hawthorne Park, the mist clinging to hedgerows like gauze and the scent of damp earth mingling with the delicate fragrance of early blooms. Eliza Whitcombe stood at the edge of the open pasture, brambles shifting restlessly beneath her, muscles coiled and attentive. Her gown, simple yet elegant, caught the light in subtle glimmers, and her dark hair was tied back with the single ribbon she favored for riding. She exhaled slowly, letting the crisp air fill her lungs, steadying the tension that had tightened in her shoulders since Alistair's message had arrived. He had requested a final ride, a test he claimed not of speed but of character. The proposition, unadorned and unobserved, carried the weight of everything left unresolved between them. Alistair Ravenshire appeared at the far edge of the field, dismounted, the morning mist wrapping around him like a cloak. His chestnut horse, gleaming and powerful, pawed at the ground impatiently. He removed his gloves deliberately, folding them in his hands before speaking. "I have come, Miss Whitcombe, not to wager, not to entertain society, but to ride honestly." His gaze, steady and unflinching, met hers with an intensity that seemed to strip away pretense and expectation alike. There was no audience here, no carriage-lined hedgerows to witness triumph or failure, only open sky and the raw honesty of two people confronting truth. She inclined her head, a subtle acknowledgement of the gravity between them. "Then we ride as equals," she said softly, the words measured yet imbued with the quiet fire that had carried her through ridicule and challenge. Bramble stamped once, and Eliza felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the intimate connection between rider and mount. Alistair mounted beside her, settling into his saddle with a confidence tempered now by the restraint of understanding rather than pride. The field stretched wide before them, dew-laden grass bending beneath hooves, the horizon a line of uncertain possibility. They set off, hooves striking earth in a rhythm that spoke not of competition but of shared momentum. The air was rich with the scent of spring, of rain yet to fall, and the subtle creak of saddles and the occasional whinny of the horses became a private symphony. At first they rode side by side, neither seeking advantage, each attentive to the other's movements, each aware of the delicate balance between independence and connection. Eliza felt a thrill not from victory but from the unspoken communion, the recognition that Alistair's presence was no longer a threat or a challenge, but a partnership formed in shared courage and mutual respect. Halfway across the field, Alistair gently adjusted his posture, matching the cadence of Bramble's steps, and spoke, voice low but carrying the weight of sincerity, "I have never known a woman to command so much grace under scrutiny. Not admiration, nor obligation, nor expectation, simply the courage to persist." His words, intimate yet unpretentious, caused a flicker of warmth to rise in her chest, a recognition of being truly seen, beyond the social theater and public whispers. Eliza's lips curved ever so slightly, the motion almost imperceptible, but charged with the quiet acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. Rain began to fall softly, at first as scattered droplets, then as a gentle curtain of silver that washed over the field. Neither faltered. Their horses surged forward, muscles coiled and strong, hooves striking earth with an almost musical resonance. The rain drummed against Eliza's shoulders, yet she felt a liberation in its rhythm, a washing away of doubt, of humiliation, of past expectations. Alistair rode close, matching her pace, his eyes reflecting both the sky and the depth of understanding that had grown between them. In this shared endeavor, the hierarchy of title, fortune, and gossip dissolved, leaving only two hearts attuned to courage, honor, and truth. As they crested the final rise, the wind tugging at skirts and ribbons, Alistair slowed, bringing his horse gently beside Bramble. He removed his gloves and extended them to her once more, the black leather damp with rain but softened by intention. "Take them," he said quietly, "for I have no desire to shelter you from effort, only to acknowledge the strength you have already displayed." Her hands, still gripping the reins lightly, hovered above the offering, and then with a deliberate motion she accepted, fingers brushing against his in a spark of trust and recognition. The moment stretched, delicate and unbroken. Neither spoke, yet the weight of choice, of consent, of recognition resonated between them. Alistair lowered his voice further, so low that only she could hear. "Eliza Whitcombe, you have outrun my arrogance, outpaced my certainty, and surpassed every expectation I believed immutable. Ride beside me, not as a wager, not as a victory, but as my equal, and as the only companion I have ever desired." Her chest rose and fell with the effort of contained emotion. For weeks, she had navigated humiliation and courage, ridicule and whispered admiration, but the clarity of this moment rendered all else insignificant. Slowly, with a grace that belied the tremor in her hands, she responded, voice steady, eyes locking with his, "Then, my lord, try to keep pace." The rain fell harder now, a silver curtain that rendered the field both intimate and infinite. Their horses moved forward together, the cadence perfect, neither leading, neither yielding, the world beyond the mist and grass disappearing into insignificance. Every stride, every motion, spoke of partnership, of equality, of hearts aligned not by necessity but by choice. Alistair glanced at her, a smile forming not of triumph but of recognition, and she returned it, her own expression carrying the quiet triumph of one who had endured, who had chosen, who had been seen and acknowledged for all that she truly was. They slowed at the far edge of the field, hearts beating with exertion and exhilaration, soaked through with rain yet unburdened by fatigue. The horses nuzzled, sensing the completion of a journey beyond mere distance. Alistair dismounted, offering a hand to assist her from Bramble's back, and their fingers met once again, this time with the unspoken promise of continuity, of respect, of shared courage. The mist began to lift, revealing the horizon touched by sun, the promise of warmth and clarity after the storm. In that quiet aftermath, amid the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers, both recognized the transformation that had occurred, not in triumph, not in conquest, but in the revelation of true character, mutual acknowledgement, and the fragile, profound beginnings of love. And as they stood together, rain-soaked and silent, the field stretched endlessly before them, the horizon open, the sky wide, and both hearts knew. The wager had ended, society's scrutiny had faded, and what remained, delicate, thrilling and utterly undeniable, was theirs alone to claim. The camellia's petals, still clinging to her gloves, trembled in the wind, and in that gentle motion lay the promise that courage had never ridden alone, and that their story, bound by choice and respect, had only just begun.